it is interesting when you look at something like a product hunt daily newsletter, and there's so many different AI tools that are coming out. And yeah, you have to wonder how many of them are going to be around in a year.
Welcome to the Entail AI podcast, where we go behind the scenes with top marketing leaders and innovators who are driving growth for their brands. In today's episode, we welcome back to the podcast founder of Source Labs, Sargent, who has held several senior marketing positions over the years and is currently the Senior Director of Product Marketing at ArangoDB. This episode dives into Al's insights on solving content creation challenges and scaling marketing efforts efficiently.
Thanks a lot for jumping on the podcast again. And we had a very interesting conversation last time, so this is a follow-up. I want to discuss with you also some of the challenges that companies are now facing with content creation. Especially, from my perspective, I think the challenges are mostly around, the need for video now. Video consumption is growing all the time. Most companies, when it comes to content, when they speak about content marketing, it's first and foremost for SEO, articles and so on. Then they have social media, but I feel like social media is the type of social media content that brands have been creating. Put aside Nike and, really the outliers are the best companies that create content. For most companies, I feel like they fall short when it comes to content compared to what you see on the market today. On social media today, when, individuals can create amazing content. And it seems to me like for most companies, it's very difficult to keep up with that. Even if you check out some of the biggest brands, I looked at Gong.io recently, and if you go to their YouTube profile and you look at or their Instagram or LinkedIn or whatever, TikTok, just for example, look at the short videos that they produce, okay? There's almost nothing there and definitely not a lot of views. Whereas if you check even a platform like TikTok where you'd expect like younger generation, etc., there's a lot of content that has to do with sales. Again, if you're talking about Gong as an example, a lot of content that has to do with sales, a lot of views as well. So there is demand, it is popular, but it seems like companies are really behind. So I'll be really happy to hear your take on this.
Yeah. I think, so speaking from my area of focus, which is B2B tech companies, I believe that a lot of them really don't invest in persuasive video content. And like you said, even when you do go to their YouTube page, there might be sort of generic explainer videos, but it's all very soulless. There's no real face to the company. And I think the reason for this is that too few of companies really think about investing in creating a brand ambassador to speak to their customers, to speak to the market. Someone who is really competent at creating these videos, someone very energetic, someone passionate, authentic, and has the bandwidth to continually create this content across all these different mediums, whether it's video or podcasts, etc. So again, it's something where if you think about the key people on a marketing team, usually a CMO or head of marketing will come in. Okay, they've got themselves as the overall leader. They need their head of demand gen. They need their web digital person. They need their product marketing lead. But they rarely think about who is going to be our brand ambassador. I think this is somebody who needs to be elevated to the top of the hiring priorities for a CMO. It needs to be someone who reports directly to the CMO, has that voice, has that seat at the table, but also is not really encumbered with a big team and really is free to just get out there and create content. They're supported with a production team to be able to edit their content, repurpose it, repackage it. But they themselves are not bogged down with a lot of managerial duties. And so probably the person I can think of who's the best example of this is a guy who I worked with in the past named Josh Long. He started as a developer advocate for Spring, which is a technology used to build Java software. He started in that role at VMware in 2010, and 14 years later, he's still doing that role. He's pumped out a huge amount of content. So he's been very successful there.
I definitely agree, and I understand where you come from, because it's almost like you're saying to be a really successful B2B content creator, you pretty much need to be almost like CMO level, like with the type of understanding and understanding the brand, understanding the domain and all that, to be able to just create content that's authoritative, that's on brand, that's correct, even, like not making mistakes when you represent the brand and so on. So you need quite a high senior person. And you see that, like a DevRel person is a very good example because you need people who understand all the technicalities and they can also speak on camera and they're charismatic enough. So you see that in companies selling to developers that if they have a really good DevRel, they can do an amazing job as the advocate and as the face of the company. But then I think one of the issues is we're talking about a senior person. So like I said, I mean, it's almost like a CMO. It's a person. It's not just a presenter. And I mean, of course, you don't want to have a presenter because they don't have the expertise and they're not authentic. But then if your competition is people creating content, individuals creating content on their own time, I mean, basically for free, besides time, it doesn't cost them anything. They can edit the content for free, on CapCut or whatever free software. And then you need quite a senior person and like a production crew with them. You end up with content creation costs that are quite expensive, I would say. And I think it's becoming more and more difficult in terms of ROI because there's a bunch of reasons we can go into them. But just my question is, how do you solve that?
So let's address the seniority question first, and we can talk about production costs second. In terms of the seniority, you can see people. So DevRel, you're right. Developer relations, that is a great model, and I think that is an underused model for a lot of B2B software companies. And when you look in terms of the seniority, when Josh started at VMware, he wasn't that senior. He had been a developer for maybe 5 years, a Java developer. So he had the domain expertise to do the job, but he wasn't super senior. And he rolled up to a head of DevRel, who I believe rolled up to the head of marketing. And at the time, our strategy was to have several of these DevRel people, but it was just one level below the CMO. So organizationally, the person is certainly connected to the top levels, but they themselves don't need to be super senior. Really, what matters is expertise. And it doesn't have to be. It can be someone older as well. It doesn't have to be someone 5 years out of college. But the key thing is they're telegenic and they're passionate and knowledgeable and so forth. In terms of the production costs, I don't know. I might push back because creating the original content. Well, so I think in terms of creating the original content, I think it's important to really, once you have somebody who, again, like a Josh, if you look at what he does, the stuff just kind of comes naturally to him. He can get up on camera, he can set up a WebEx, he can record it. And it's just, those mechanics get to be easier and easier over time as you do them more often. And so that drives costs down. When you start talking about the same product versions, the same features, the first time, okay, it might take some time to produce, but over time, it gets to be less and less of less and less expensive. And then in terms of repurposing the content, once you record the video, you transcribe it through AI, you chop it up, you turn it into a blog post, you turn it into quotes. Yes, that takes time, but it's also something that can be done. It's relatively rote. It can be done relatively quickly. So I think the repetition drives down costs, and then the repurposing, I think, can drive down costs too. Maybe you see it differently, but that's how I see it.
No, I definitely agree. I think one of my main concerns is when you look at ROI. I mean, at Entail, we're an organic marketing platform, and when it comes to organic marketing, either social media or SEO, most companies don't really measure ROI. I mean, social media companies have maybe a social media manager. In most companies, they don't really take that position very seriously. They just say, okay, we need to be there. We need to be out there. We need to be seen. We can't be a large company with like no social media presence. And I mean, I'm not talking about like fashion brands and so on, where they're like on social media and they're investing millions in that. I'm speaking about tech companies, for example. So either you have like very successful companies with like those DevRel examples that you mentioned, but for most companies, they don't have that. And so to build that, and I mean, if they do have social media, for them it's organic or SEO, they rarely measure conversion. They don't really have the tools. I mean, we're working with large companies, and they don't really have the tools to even measure ROI on their organic marketing, even like their SEO, like maybe just in general terms. And so we give them those tools. I mean, it has its pros and cons because we let them have all the visibility, but then there's like also much more demand from our side. They all of a sudden they can see ROI, so they demand ROI. Before that, they were just doing SEO. They had no idea. Now we're telling them, okay, you don't have ROI. We can give you ROI, so they can start, and then they start measuring us, which is fine. That's how marketing should work. But for that reason, I'm very concerned with ROI. And I think that if you're competing with social media, where we call it like zero-click content, the platforms, they don't provide you with a link, just a link in bio, or you can put a link in the description on YouTube, but most people don't click it. The conversion rate on video is much, much, much lower than written text, which is one of the reasons why Google monetizes so well the search results and much less like YouTube, for example. When you look for an article, you have a blue link to click, and then it's much more natural to click also on an ad, rather than when you watch a video, you're not in the like the mindset of like clicking links. You just want to sit back and watch something. Okay, what that really means is that you need to have a lot of views to like the conversion rate from views to taking an action is much lower on video than SEO, for example. So if you have a lot of views, like if a company runs an influencer campaign, you can check out their search console, and if the campaign was successful and you got 100,000 views on Instagram, let's say, this could translate to 5,000 visits to the website of branded traffic, people searching for the brand. Because 100,000 people saw you on Instagram, they went and they Googled you and they found you through that. So the conversion rate from view to taking an action is much, much, much lower. And then if the production costs are much higher than text, and the competition is mostly individuals these days that create content for free, I think at the end of the day, the economics don't really work. And that's my main concern there. Like, I think that companies should definitely create a lot of content. And I mean, one of the topics that you want to discuss about is where the biggest opportunities are. So in my opinion, it is in social media. There's a lot of demand for video content. People want to consume more and more video content, long, short, medium, whatever. But I think one of the biggest problems, besides like finding that person with all the capabilities that you mentioned, is also the costs of having that person that was often senior, and the need to also edit that content professionally, when the competition is a person creating content on their own, sometimes when they're driving their car, sometimes when they're on the street, and then editing it on their own, maybe on their phone, and just shooting it, to the internet,
So first of all, for a lot of B2B tech companies, often you don't have this problem of the independent creator making content. If you did, that would be a wonderful. If you're running a cloud database service, for instance, and there's 10 influencers creating content talking about your stuff, that's great. They're almost doing their job for you. And as a head of marketing, you wouldn't need to really worry about, like, you can check that box, right? Video content's getting created for free, wonderful. Keep those folks happy, give them swag, invite them to your user conference, whatever you can do to keep them happy, because they're doing your job for free. But I think most of the time that isn't usually the case. Most of the time, the company itself, the vendor themselves, has to create that content. And then I guess I would wonder, what I'm wondering, Tom, is why not just in the same way that individual influencers can create content easily, in their car, shoot themselves, edit themselves, why can't the vendors, ambassador, brand ambassador, DevRel person, why can't they do things the same way?
I think they can, but at the same time, that person you mentioned, his name is Josh, right? So I think an example like this person is a bit rare to find people who have these capabilities. That's one. And because they're rare, I mean, you can find somebody who's maybe a junior and then they can like grow with you. Like, say they started as a developer and then became DevRel and became successful. So that's an option. I think it's difficult to make something like this like really like repeatable and scalable. It's difficult for companies to recruit people like that. And then if you want to recruit somebody who also already has experience, then they're already a brand in a way. They have their self-branding going on for them already. So they'll probably, again, be quite expensive. And you also need a person, like I said, with enough expertise, because if you want to set them loose and let them, do your thing, you're an expert. You can go and you're charismatic enough. You can film yourself in your car or do whatever, because everything you say is on these topics is interesting enough and relevant and so on, then again, that person that has the charisma, the willing to film themselves, the knowledge, the expertise, etc., you're talking about the kind of a unicorn. You're talking about, a person who can be like a mini celebrity in their industry, And so again, you're talking about quite an expensive salary.
Again, I don't know, I disagree on that, to be honest, because I think if you look within your company, I'd say there's two places you can look. You can look kind of within your company and look within your community. If you look within your company, there might be somebody who is on your support team, who is they may or may not be your best support person, might not be your most knowledgeable support person, but they might be your most personable support person and passionate. And so pull them out of the support team and put them into this role, if that's something they want to do. Or it could be a sales engineer. Sales engineers aren't cheap. So support people generally have a lower salary than, let's say, a senior developer. A sales engineer would be tougher because you are working on a higher salary basis. Given that sales engineers quite often are unicorns. They're good at selling, they know the technology. But again, that's another option. And then I guess the third option would be pull somebody out of your community. So again, Josh's case, he was a relatively junior Java developer. And so he was, he'd been doing this on his own. And so they saw the spark and pulled him in to be able to doing this DevRel job. So it is someone who's unique. You're right. It is somewhat of a unicorn, but I think they can be found. And I think too often companies aren't really looking for this person. They don't see the need for the person. Therefore, they're not looking, and they don't get out there and have these brand ambassadors. So now, is it scalable? You definitely need someone. I think part of the unicorn needs to be someone has that passion and that energy to just continually pump out content. And again, they're keeping it casual. They're doing it in their car or at their desk or whatever. And so because they're keeping things simple, they're able to put something out as often as every day. So I think the scalability, I think is a function of energy and a function of repurposing the content. It's not easy, but I think it's doable.
And what do you think really about the opportunities? I mean, what are the biggest opportunities now in content creation? I mean, taking into account the of course, AI and how it's changing the market and definitely what's going on social media and video.
Yeah, again, I think, I think in terms of opportunity, I think there is, too few brands, I think you said it yourself, too few brands really are working on doing video and podcast sustainably. Those are very persuasive mediums. And companies, again, don't really know quite how to do it. Some companies will have a senior executive maybe get up and speak a bit, but the problem is these senior executives, they have a lot of responsibilities and they can't be doing just content creation and their senior leadership job. So that's a pattern I've seen in the past that's failed because, the CTO certainly has a great title, but again, they can't do this continually. Probably the best example of a senior person I've seen is Adam Mosseri, the head of Instagram. I know this is more of a B2C example than a B2B example. But as sort of authentic as he is, as he kind of makes it look very effortless, even he's able to only produce a video once every week or two. So I think the opportunities are, again, to find these unicorns who can produce the video content, the podcast content easily, and then repurpose it into other media such as images, let's say quotes, or blog posts, the transcripts, or written quotes, highlight quotes that are posted to, let's say, Twitter. Be able to repurpose it and have that sort of workflow that comes out.
Scaling your content marketing and SEO efforts can be difficult. If you're looking for a partner to help you succeed, Entail AI has the right tools to help you achieve your marketing goals. Find out more at the link in our bio or go to entail.ai to check out our range of solutions.
You mentioned AI. I think AI is a great brainstorming tool to ensure that you're covering all your bases. But I think it's also important for content development teams to first take their own crack at creating the content before they, type into a chatbot and get answers. So, for example, you sent me over a number of topics that we were going to cover today, and I plugged the first one, which is what are today's biggest opportunities in content marketing. I plugged that into Google Gemini and ChatGPT, and I did that after I sort of talked about sort of came up with my own answer in terms of these brand ambassadors. And both of Gemini and ChatGPT, they provided a lot of fluff, but they did come up with some interesting ideas that I hadn't really thought of. The first one is mining your customer information to create infographics, put that behind a reg wall to be able to generate leads. So for instance, if you're running a popular cloud database service, you could share stats on query complexity and things like that. People love to compare themselves. Another idea that Gemini and ChatGPT came up with was interactive content like ROI calculators and assessments and quizzes. And it was fun because Google Gemini suggested that one takes a look at Zoom's media ROI calculator, which Google search couldn't find. So I assume it was some kind of hallucination. So again, it's a good example of where, sure, generate ideas, be on the lookout for hallucinations. But the interesting thing is Google search did come up with other types of median cost calculators from other companies, not Zoom. So yeah, I mean, I think AI can be. I think the key thing with marketing leaders is to really, don't use it as a crutch. Don't use it on your first pass, and use it to sort of make sure you're checking all your boxes. And again, be on the lookout for hallucinations.
I think the way to use AI, I think there's definitely many ways to use AI, but I think it's a bit different than what is being spoken about. I think it's mostly, first of all, you need to create something unique and something different, and most of the talk you hear about it is like to use ChatGPT to write this or that or to prompt it and so on. What I find it useful for, I think that most of the content you create should be based on your ideas and your understanding. So, and one of the easiest way to share ideas is, the easiest way to communicate ideas is through speech. That's how we mostly communicate. We can communicate on the phone better than if we can just sign language if you can't speak. So that's like our first mode of communication is speech. And it's actually similar to how ChatGPT works, because when you just speak, you don't think, you just come up with the next word spontaneously. And so it's like, when they explain how ChatGPT works, it kind of like guesses the next word all the time. That's how we communicate. Sometimes you stop and you think, you go down to the hard drive, but mostly you're just in the cache, right? Just coming up with the next word. So what I find is that, in the type of content we create, which is mostly informational, educational, it's not that entertainment. So it's mostly about people sharing their ideas and their knowledge. And so you can use AI to come up with the talking points, with the topics that you want to cover. And we're using it also to really map all the topics and understand their value and their relevancy and so on, to do that at scale. But eventually, when you have the talking points and you have all the topics that are relevant, and let's say you want to create a content piece, you can make sure that you're covering all the relevant topics, because even if you speak about a topic that you're an expert on, it's not guaranteed that you're going to cover all the subtopics within it, because you may forget something or, you just didn't think about something, So this ensures that you have all the topics covered. So I think that's a great way of using it. We also use it to edit content, even though it's a bit tricky because sometimes it changes the meaning, sometimes it leaves important stuff out and so on. So it's not really that trustworthy. But I think another great way of using it is in video editing. And like we're saying, a lot of the opportunities now are in video. And the examples from Sora that all over the internet now, it's not necessarily just to be able to create an entire video from scratch, but when you're editing video, if you just use it as another tool, and I think I gave you the example last time when we spoke, it's like creating digital music, And the fact that anyone can create digital music doesn't mean that everyone can create good digital music. I can't. And so if you can use these tools to create, to edit videos in a very compelling way, or, I've seen a few very good examples of videos that you watch. I've seen this guy, he takes the three guys telling dad jokes on TikTok, like they're sitting in an ambush and they're telling, like, whispering dad jokes, kind of like, stupid dad jokes. And he takes that and he takes the voice, just the soundtrack, and he creates, usually they're like three guys sitting around, and he replaces them with these three aliens, and it's like an animated alien scene, and they're telling dead jokes, and that's like, and they see like a spaceship flying by, and they're like, I know, alien creatures working by and all that, and it's like really cool and really creative. And you say, wow, this has probably been edited with. I have no idea how he did it. I think there's AI involved, and when you see something like that, and say, wow, I couldn't create anything. I don't know many people who can create content like that. I think that's when you say, okay, this is how we should use AI. This is because you're creating something unique, something completely different. And I think this is like when we're gonna see like a lot of success from people who can be very creative with all those tools to create something unique.
Absolutely. And I think, an example that I have is similar, but really, really pedestrian, but so important. Customer case studies are crucial, especially in B2B software. The thing is we sell to engineers, we sell to engineering leaders a lot of the time. And, God bless them, but being telegenic and persuasive is often not their core strength, right? They're builders, right? They're not talking heads. And so as a result, a lot of times they'll give these, you interview them, you talk to them. There's a lot of ums and ahs and just a lot of filler words, and being able to use AI to get through that and remove those filler words and yet still make the video appear smooth, and being able to do that at scale. So you can do it because you're not just trying to do it for, one company, you're trying to do it for 10, 20, 30, 40 companies and do it quickly. And so AI there's a huge need for that. And I think the tools for that are pretty well established. And it's definitely something that should be part of the toolkit for any marketing team.
Yeah, I actually think, because we are in that space, and we were like thinking for a while, wow, like first of all, when we started the company, it was like back in COVID time, and people were asking me, so you're in content and you're using AI, so are you building like a text generation tool or whatever? And I said, no, I think there's going to be many people competing over these, so like over this technology and these tools. And I thought, I don't want to compete in the red ocean. And then, Jasper AI came out, AnyWord, and like companies raised a lot of money. Jasper AI raised like, around about 100 million. And I said, okay, you see, like this is the copy AI, whatever. Like I said, okay, this is like the red ocean I was speaking about. And then ChatGPT came out and like, basically almost erased everyone else. But also today I kind of like feel, just as a side note, I think like that it's kind of like risky being in that space and building AI tools, because because of AI, the development, the difficulty, the threshold has gone down so much. You can build tools much faster. I think it's going to be much more difficult to build a HubSpot where, like become a marketing software that everyone uses for so many years, and it provides so much value. Because if you can provide this AI tool to do this or that, to cut short videos very quickly. If now there's tools to like you say, to trim videos, then as a marketer, of course, you're going to want to use them. But then because the technology is becoming so easy to create, there's going to be a bunch of other companies doing that, like if not now, then in a year. So it's going to be, I think, very difficult to sustain a business in that type of environment. Like, because there's like all these tools all the time coming out. All the time you find new things and new ways to edit content, to create content. I think it's going to be very difficult to have a sustainable business in that space with all this, like with how easy it is to innovate.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a pattern in the technology market that we've seen in the past, which is you've got a lot of capital coming in to fund a lot of startups, and there's a huge amount of competition. I wasn't in the business back then, but in the early 80s, there were something like 40 different hard drive companies all competing to make a hard drive. And now it seems incredibly commoditized, right? You have a certain amount of storage, a certain seek time, and there you go. But there were 40 companies in there, all competing. Back in the first .com boom, we had multiple companies doing, trying to ship 50-pound bags of pet food to your door, more than the market could handle. And so we're seeing the same pattern with AI now. A lot of capital coming in. There will be a few leaders, and they'll dominate. They'll make a lot of money, and there'll be a lot of companies that kind of fall by the wayside. it is interesting when you look at something like a Product Hunt daily newsletter, and there's so many different AI tools that are coming out. And yeah, you have to wonder how many of them are going to be around in a year. I just hope that, that some of the leadership does come to, new emerging leaders as opposed to the same old companies, the Microsofts, the Googles, and so forth. I mean, OpenAI is one new leader that we've seen. Perhaps Anthropic will be another one. But yeah, it's nice. Competition is a good thing. It brings better solutions to the market. So I do hope that, just like in the sort of the Web 2.0 space, we got, Uber and Airbnb and other kind of new companies that came out to really provide a lot more consumer choice. I hope the same thing happens here in AI.
I think it definitely will. And that's also one of the reasons why, it also was another talking point we wanted to cover, like about how to streamline content creation processes. And I mean, my thinking is very similar to yours, to what you just said now. I mean, I think there's going to be a few companies that have a lot of resources and a lot of data that are going to be OpenAI is Microsoft in a way, and then you have Google, probably Apple, Amazon. So they're going to be the infrastructure. It's kind of like you see with AWS and then Google Cloud. Like these companies providing the infrastructure. Or like Shopify, Wix, like providing the infrastructure for e-commerce or for website building. I think it's going to be quite similar. The companies that have the budgets to run the heavy algorithms and have a lot of data, they'll be the infrastructure in terms of the algorithm that all the smaller AI tools are going to run on top of. I think competing with those is going to be very, very challenging and risky. There are going to be companies that emerge, and like TikTok emerged, and is taking away traffic from all the other big players. So there's always going to be successes like that, but you can basically count them on one hand. I think it's not going to be a lot of companies. So that's also one of the reasons why we selected. Why our reasoning is that in a way, like using AI in content creation is going to be commodified. So there's no reason to invest in it. It's very expensive to develop. It's going to be commodified. You won't be able to sell it for a lot of money. And so it's going to be very difficult to cover your R&D investment in that. And for that, and because you can just use it from an API, just like you do now with OpenAI for very cheap. That's why we can focus on how to streamline the content creation process, which is, like I said, like another topic I wanted to hear your thoughts about. Because you also mentioned like this example of having a dev role or a brand ambassador within the company. And like maybe a kind of editing crew with them. So how do you see that? How do you think you can turn this process into something that's streamlined, where you can put out content, high quality content, regularly?
You mentioned an interesting point about AI and commoditization. Actually, if I could just kind of back up a minute or two and talk about that. I think there's one really interesting point, which is that someone made, which was that if eventually a company's chatbot will be just as important or more important to a company's presence in the market as their website. And it struck me as a really key point and really true. I mean, if you think about it, again, it's interesting to look at these patterns of technology. It might have been, I don't know, back in the 50s, it might have been the face of the company might have been the traveling salesman. And then in the 70s or 80s, it might have been their 800 number that you could call. And then in the 90s, of course, it became their website. In the 2010s, it became their mobile application. And maybe in the 2020s and 30s, it becomes their chatbots that they can use. It's not that those other things go away. It's just that maybe they fade into being less relevant or less front and center. And I think when you see that, I think it'll be interesting because you talk about these LLMs being commoditized. And I think that might happen less and less. And the reason there might be pushback against that is we are starting to see companies either license their data, like Reddit's licensing their data now to train Google's LLM. But you could also see that if a company says, if I'm running a software vendor and I want to have my automated chatbot to answer questions, I don't want to build that in ChatGPT because that's also pulling in that's pulling in content from my competitors who are probably going to be denigrating my product or not, point out its flaws. So I'm going to want to essentially have, kind of pull in the content, have an LLM and have that is trained on data from my own website that where I've curated the content. And then maybe I might pull in sort of a factual base layer of, I don't know, what is Wi-Fi? What is the internet? What is a domain name? So I can kind of marry those two things together, almost like a sort of a subset of Wikipedia plus my own content. And that becomes sort of the basis for my chatbot. And maybe there is a curation thing where if somebody posts a horrible review of me, maybe I take that out of the LLM because I want to put my company in the best light possible. So I think there might be I think we might see a pattern like that where we don't have sort of this sort of generic flat. I mean, maybe OpenAI does, and Google Gemini. There are some who build these LLMs that are sort of hoovered up from as much of the public internet as possible. But we also might see more individual chatbots, that are basically tuned to the needs of a particular organization, vendor, etc. So just some thoughts on there. I don't think there'll be just one or two LLMs. I think there'll be many LLMs. That would be my bet. But anyway, you want to talk about streamlining content creation?
Yeah. So what are your thoughts about that? I mean, I still think that between using all these tools, it's still quite challenging to create a process where you can regularly push out, content that's high quality, interesting, relevant, on brand, etc.
I mean, I think one of the things, and this is going to be pretty generic advice, but one thing is to prioritize and know what to say no to. So, understand your priorities, understand your budget, so you can focus on what matters and ignore what doesn't. So, for instance, if you're building software used by engineers, let's say it's early on, you're penetrating a new market, you have small deal sizes, you're not going to want to start, creating content for business leaders. You're going to want to focus your content creation on the engineers and maybe their managers. The business leader content that might come later, 2, 3, 4 years, when you have several beachheads into a new company, several engineering teams use your stuff, and the company wants to consolidate that spend and have a lower unit cost for the software, and then also roll it out more broadly across the organization. So it's focusing the content development on where you're at in the life cycle of your company. So that's one key thing. I think also, geographic constraints as well can be done in addition to persona constraints. So for instance, if you're selling in just the US or just Europe, have your content created there. So pretty generic advice there from the get-go, but is to focus. The second one, I mean, I know we've mentioned this, but is to have a content calendar and to work as much as possible on repurposing the content. I think like one thing I see is, and again, it sounds really obvious, but so much of the time I'll see a CEO or a CTO interviewed for an article, and the marketing team, what they should do is they should say, oh, okay, we're going to take this one video, and what they'll do is maybe they'll post it to maybe it'll be a few tweets, maybe a LinkedIn post. But what they need to do is they need to really take that and really leverage it and repurpose it as much as possible. So chop up that video, put into short form content that might go on, I don't know, Instagram or TikTok, let's say. Not common for B2B, but we are starting to see some companies doing that. Take out key quotes, turn the quotes into visuals that you can post to Instagram or LinkedIn. Take the text, post it to Threads, to Twitter, and really repurpose it a lot. And I think I read one somewhere that it's important to spend about half your time on creating original content and half your time on repurposing that and distributing that content. And I think too many marketing teams, it's like a 95-5 split when it really needs to be closer to 50-50. So I think that's a key way and the reason, how does it streamline? I think it streamlines it because being original is hard. Just like we were saying, how do you find this unicorn of a person who's energetic and authentic and knowledgeable and all that? It's a lot easier to say, okay, we found the unicorn, and that's the tough piece. But then the repurposing is pretty commoditized. You can do that, through agencies. It's relatively low cost. There's software vendors who can help you with it. So I think it's important to really think about repurposing more. And there's no shame in repurposing. I think with too many marketing teams, everything has to be new. Everything has to be original. I really think it's important to not always think like that, because you can get a lot more efficiency and you can get a lot more streamlined when you think about repurposing.
It's been a pleasure to speak again, Al. And thanks for sharing all your insight.
Thank you. Happy to. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to the Entail AI podcast. Join us next time for another masterclass when we sit down with a marketing luminary to reveal their path to success.